My daughter always saw me as a relic from the past. My old truck, a faithful friend and symbol of my simple life, was a source of pure shame for her. She did everything she could to keep me from driving it to her perfect wedding, even paying for a soulless town car to hide me from her influential guests. They laughed at my choices, not realizing that my life held something far more valuable than their materialistic possessions. They had no idea that a single act of kindness gave me not just a car, but a weapon of justice. I was on my way to the wedding, but I was prepared to teach them the most important lesson of their lives. The only question is, who would be left speechless in the end? My name is Dorothea, and at 63 years old, I've learned that a person's worth isn't measured in dollars, but in the dents they've accumulated along the way. I live in a quiet, sprawling suburb of Scottsdale, Arizona, in a house that's seen more birthdays and broken hearts than the rest of the neighborhood combined. It was here that my late husband, George, and I built a life of simple dignity, a life based on working hard and not putting on airs. He was a man who believed in lasting quality over fleeting flash, and a piece of that belief is still parked in my driveway, a 1978 Ford F-150 pickup. The old girl's paint is faded to a soft, sun-baked red, and the rust on her fenders is a map of our shared history. To me, she's not a vehicle. She's a memory on wheels. Every scratch a story, every rumble of her engine a gentle reminder of George's steady presence. My son Mark, a corporate lawyer with a taste for German sedans, sees her as a relic, a monument to my stubborn refusal to keep up. He and his wife, a woman who considers a trip to the grocery store a fashion show, have long tried to convince me to trade her in for something respectable. I've always just chuckled and told them the old truck and I have an understanding. She gets me where I need to go, and I give her the loving care she deserves. I was in the middle of a rather delicate negotiation with a particularly stubborn hosebib in the backyard when I heard the unmistakable whir of an electric car pulling up the driveway. I didn't even have to look up. My daughter, Jennifer, in a sleek, silent vehicle that seemed to whisper, "I'm better than you," had arrived. Jennifer, my sweet little girl, was all grown up now, a successful event planner with a fiancé, a man named Chad, who was so wealthy he seemed to have a gravitational pull on luxury brands. When they announced their engagement, it wasn't a family dinner. It was a curated event, a networking opportunity disguised as a celebration. I remember sitting there, a little out of place in my simple dress, listening to Chad's parents, a couple whose faces looked as if they had been ironed smooth by a team of surgeons, speak of their travels and their private collections. Chad's mother gave me a look that was equal parts pity and condescension. "Oh, Jennifer's told us all about you. Such a salt-of-the-earth person. It's charming, really." I knew what she meant. Charming was a polite word for embarrassingly provincial, and salt of the earth was their way of saying I was from the wrong side of the tracks, even if the tracks were invisible. Jennifer, clipboard in hand and a stress-induced frown etched between her perfectly shaped eyebrows, burst through the back gate. "Mom, we need to finalize the transportation for the wedding. It's less than a month away." Her voice had a frantic, high-strung quality that I'd learned to dread. She had 1,000 details to coordinate, and my presence in her perfectly planned day was apparently a logistical anesthetic nightmare. "I'll just drive myself, honey. You know the old girl and I can handle it." Jennifer's face contorted in a way that managed to convey both disgust and panic. "Oh my God, Mom, no, you can't drive that thing to my wedding. What will people think? It's the country club, not a barn raising. It's so embarrassing." The words felt like a slap. My truck, a testament to my values and a physical link to my late husband, was now a source of her shame. "Jennifer, it's a perfectly good truck," I said, my voice now a little strained. "It'll get me there just fine." No, it won't, she insisted, her voice rising. It's a disgrace. We'll just get you a town car. A nice, clean, anonymous town car. The word anonymous stung. She wanted me to be invisible, a nameless figure who wouldn't sully her perfect day. I'll find my own way, I said, a little too forcefully. Don't you worry about it. It's my daughter's wedding and I'll be there. That's all that matters. After she left in a huff, I felt a familiar hollow ache in my chest. It wasn't about the car, not really. It was about her not seeing me, not seeing the person I was, the life I'd built. It was about her valuing appearances over authenticity. It was about her being ashamed of me. I looked at the old Ford, sitting proudly in the driveway. The sun glinted off its rusty fender, and I felt a surge of defiant pride. No, I wouldn't get a town car. I would drive my truck because it was mine and it represented who I was. And if they couldn't handle that, it was their problem, not mine. The thought of their faces when I rolled up in my old rusty truck made me smile. A small, grim smile. It was a small act of rebellion, but it was all I had. I got in the truck, the engine sputtering to life, a familiar, comforting sound. I was off to the community garden, a place where no one cared what you drove, only how you treated the earth and the people around you. I was a regular there, volunteering my time to help grow fresh vegetables for the local food bank. It was a place where kindness was currency, and that's the kind of economy I wanted to be a part of. As I drove, I thought about all the money I had saved over the years, not on a new car, not on fancy clothes, but on things that really mattered. I had quietly been building a small nest egg, a little cushion for the future, and I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I would need every single cent of it. But little did I know that my defiant act would set off a chain of events that would change everything. The conversation with my daughter, as hurtful as it was, became the catalyst for something far greater. It planted a seed of resolution in my mind. I was done being pushed around, done being embarrassed for being myself. I wasn't just going to drive my old truck to the wedding. I was going to make a statement. The Ford was a part of me, a part of my story. It was a monument to a life of hard work, thrift, and authenticity. My daughter and her future husband, with their obsession with superficial things, were about to learn a lesson they wouldn't want to forget. But the question was, how? The solution to my problem came from a most unexpected source, from an interaction that started with a simple act of kindness, an act that I never could have imagined would change my entire world. As I pulled into the community garden's gravel lot, a cloud of dust rising behind me, I saw an old man struggling with a wheelbarrow overflowing with compost. He looked weary, and his hands, gnarled with arthritis, were shaking as he tried to maneuver the heavy load. Without a second thought, I hopped out of my truck. "Need a hand with that, sir?" I asked, my voice full of genuine concern. He looked up, his face etched with a mix of surprise and gratitude. "Why, that would be a godsend, ma'am," he said, his voice raspy. Together, we pushed the wheelbarrow to his plot, the earthy smell of the compost filling the air. We worked side by side for the better part of an hour, talking about the weather, the stubborn weeds, and the sheer joy of watching something grow from nothing. He told me his name was Arthur, a retired engineer, and he'd been coming to the garden for years. He was a quiet man, but his eyes held a depth of kindness that was rare to find. We shared stories of our lives, the simple joys and the quiet heartaches. He told me about his wife who had passed away 2 years ago, and I told him about my late husband. We were two old souls, connecting over a shared love for the soil and a shared sense of loss. We were just two people, helping each other out, with no agenda, no pretense, just simple human decency. The kind of decency my daughter seemed to have forgotten. As we were finishing up, he looked at my old truck with a curious look. "It's a fine machine," he said, a smile playing on his lips. "They don't make 'em like they used to." I felt a familiar warmth in my chest. "No, they certainly don't," I said, a sense of pride swelling within me. We walked back to our cars, and that's when I noticed a sleek black sedan pulling into the parking lot, the kind of car that costs more than a house. A young man, dressed in a suit that looked impossibly expensive, stepped out. He walked directly to Arthur, a look of impatience on his face. "Dad, the car's been waiting for 10 minutes. We have a meeting." His tone was tight, with frustration. Arthur just sighed, a tired, resigned sound. "I'm coming, son. I just had a little help from a new friend." He barely glanced at me, his eyes quickly dismissing me as just another old lady in an old truck. "Let's go, now." His tone was cold, dismissive. Arthur looked at me with an apologetic smile. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Dorothea." "The pleasure was all mine," I replied, a lump forming in my throat. I watched as the young man practically shoved Arthur into the sedan, and they drove off in a flash of chrome and glass. The contrast between Arthur's simple kindness and his son's arrogant impatience was stark, a painful mirror of my own life. It was a fleeting moment, a brief encounter, but it solidified my determination. I was going to this wedding, and I was going to do it on my own terms. My daughter wanted a spectacle. She was about to get one, just not the one she planned. What happened next was a complete surprise. You won't want to miss how a simple act of kindness changed everything, and how I'm about to prove that a person's worth isn't in their car, but in their character. The community garden was my sanctuary, a place where the soil was honest and the people were real. As I pulled my Ford into the gravel lot, a cloud of dust rising behind me, I saw an old man struggling with a wheelbarrow overflowing with compost. He looked weary, and his hands, gnarled with arthritis, were shaking as he tried to maneuver the heavy load. Without a second thought, I hopped out of my truck. "Need a hand with that, sir?" I asked, my voice full of genuine concern. He looked up, his face etched with a mix of surprise and gratitude. "Why, that would be a godsend, ma'am," he said, his voice raspy. Together we pushed the wheelbarrow to his plot, the earthy smell of the compost filling the air. We worked side by side for the better part of an hour, talking about the weather, the stubborn weeds, and the sheer joy of watching something grow from nothing. He told me his name was Arthur, a retired engineer, and he'd been coming to the garden for years. He was a quiet man, but his eyes held a depth of kindness that was rare to find. We shared stories of our lives, the simple joys and the quiet heartaches. He told me about his wife, who had passed away 2 years ago, and I told him about my late husband. We were two old souls connecting over a shared love for the soil and a shared sense of loss. We were just two people helping each other out, with no agenda, no pretense, just simple human decency. The kind of decency my daughter seemed to have forgotten. As we were finishing up, he looked at my old truck with a curious look. "That's a fine machine," he said, a smile playing on his lips. "They don't make them like they used to." I felt a familiar warmth in my chest. "No, they certainly don't," I said, a sense of pride swelling within me. We walked back to our cars, and that's when I noticed a sleek black sedan pulling into the parking lot, the kind of car that costs more than a house. A young man dressed in a suit that looked impossibly expensive stepped out. He walked directly to Arthur, a look of impatience on his face. "Dad," he said, his voice tight with frustration, "the car's been waiting for 10 minutes. We have a meeting." Arthur just sighed, a tired, resigned sound. "I'm coming, son. I just had a little help from a new friend." The young man barely glanced at me, his eyes quickly dismissing me as just another old lady in an old truck. "Let's go, now." His tone was cold, dismissive. Arthur looked at me with an apologetic smile. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Dorothea," he said. "The pleasure was all mine, Arthur," I replied, a lump forming in my throat. I watched as the young man practically shoved Arthur into the sedan and they drove off in a flash of chrome and glass. The contrast between Arthur's simple kindness and his son's arrogant impatience was stark, a painful mirror of my own life. I got back into my truck, the joy of the day a little diminished by the encounter. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Jennifer. "Mom, I've booked a town car for you. Don't even think about driving that thing to the wedding. It's not up for discussion. The audacity of it all. I felt a hot flush of anger. It wasn't just about the car, it was about control, about her wanting to erase a part of me, to make me conform to her perfect superficial world. I wanted to scream, to call her and tell her exactly what I thought, but I knew it would be a waste of breath. She wouldn't hear me. She would only hear what she wanted to hear. The anger simmered, turning into a cold, hard resolve. I was going to go to that wedding and I was going to do it my way. No town car, no anonymity. I was going to show up as myself. And if that wasn't good enough for them, then they had bigger problems than a rusty old truck. A few days later, I was at my usual diner, sipping a coffee, when a man in a crisp suit approached my table. It was the same young man I had seen at the community garden. My heart sank. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice hesitant. "You're Dorothea, right? The woman who helped my father, Arthur, at the community garden?" I nodded, a little wary. He told me he had a conversation with a kind woman in an old Ford truck. He's been looking for you ever since. He passed away yesterday, very suddenly. He was a good man, and I realize now I took him for granted. Before he passed, he left me a note for me. He wanted me to find you and thank you for your kindness. He said you were the first person in a long time who didn't want anything from him. He also said something about your car and how he wished he could help you out somehow. He left me a note with his last will and testament with instructions to find you. My stomach twisted into a knot. Arthur was gone. The simple kindness we shared, the brief connection, was now a memory. But then the young man did something that took me completely by surprise. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a key, a large, heavy key with a symbol on it, a symbol I recognized instantly, a symbol for a Rolls-Royce. He said, "My father was a very wealthy man. He wanted you to have this. It's his prized possession. He said you deserved a car that matched your soul, not your bank account. He also said he knew you wouldn't take it, so he had his lawyers draw up a legal document making the transfer of ownership irrevocable." I stared at the key, my mind reeling. A Rolls-Royce for me? It was a gesture of such immense, unexpected kindness that I could barely comprehend it. This was no prank, this was no joke, this was real, and it was going to change everything. My daughter and her fiancé wanted me to be invisible. Well, they were about to get the shock of their lives. I wasn't sure if I could take it. Was this all some kind of cosmic joke? A test or a cruel, elaborate trick? I felt a weave of doubt, a fear of being a fool. Was I really about to accept a car worth more than a dozen of my houses from a man I had met for less than an hour? Could I even handle something so extravagant? It was an emotional tidal wave, a mix of grief for Arthur and disbelief at the gift. I felt a pang of fear that if I said no, I would miss the opportunity of a lifetime. But if I said yes, would it change me? What was I supposed to do now? My life had always been about the simple things. Now this enormous, complicated thing was being handed to me, and I couldn't help but wonder if I was meant to have it. I wasn't just facing a decision about a car. I was facing a decision about who I was and who I was about to become. What would my husband have done? What would he have said about this? I had to find out. I had to see this through to understand why this was happening. And as the young man waited, watching me with those searching, hopeful eyes, I knew I couldn't just walk away. I couldn't just hand the key back and go on with my life as if this hadn't happened. There was a reason for all of this, a grand design that was far beyond my comprehension. I had to take a leap of faith, to trust that the universe was putting me on a path for a reason. Maybe this was my chance to teach my daughter a lesson, to show her that there was more to life than money and appearances. Maybe this was Arthur's final gift, not just to me, but to his own son, a lesson about true value. But was I strong enough to do it? Was I brave enough to step into a world so different from my own? I wasn't sure, but I was about to find out. The key felt heavy in my hand, a symbol of a choice that was about to change everything. I felt the weight of it, the promise of it, and the terrifying unknown that came with it. I had to know what came next. I stood there in the diner, the key resting on the red vinyl tabletop, a small, elegant monument to a man I had met for less than an hour. My coffee had gone cold, and my mind was racing at a speed that felt alien to my 63 years. The young man, Julian, had gone, leaving me with a key, a scrawled address, and a story that was almost too incredible to believe. He had said, "My father was a very wealthy man," and the weight of those words settled over me like a heavy blanket. Julian had been so different from his fleeting, dismissive self at the community garden. In that moment, he was raw, human, burdened by a grief that was only just beginning to truly sink in. His face, which had been a mask of impatience, was now a canvas of regret. He spoke of his father, Arthur, with a quiet sorrow. A man who had chosen a life of public-facing success while his father had quietly found contentment in a garden plot. It was a painful parallel to my own life, a life where my daughter and her fiancé prioritized what was seen over what was felt, what was tangible over what was real. The irony of it all was so thick I could practically chew on it. My daughter was trying to erase a part of me, my identity, my history, embodied in my old Ford truck. And here was a complete stranger who in his final moments had seen me for exactly who I was. Arthur, with his quiet wisdom, had gifted me the very thing my daughter and her friends would consider the ultimate status symbol, all because of an hour of shared conversation and a handful of compost. It was a cosmic joke of the highest order, a punchline that was so absurd it was brilliant. I picked up the key. It was heavy and cold, a small object that contained a world of power and possibility. I turned it over in my hand, the symbol of a sleek, elegant car etched into its polished surface. I thought about the sheer nerve of it, the audacity of a man knowing me so little, yet knowing me so well. He knew I wouldn't accept charity. He knew I would refuse a gift of that magnitude. So he had his lawyers make it irrevocable. He had taken away my ability to refuse. It was a brilliant, almost manipulative move, a final act of kindness from a man who knew what it was like to be judged by the things you owned rather than the person you were. I drove home, the key resting in the cup holder of my old Ford, a strange and powerful totem in a sea of familiar rust and worn upholstery. The contrast was almost unbearable. My tired, faithful truck rattling along the sun-baked streets of Scottsdale with a key to a luxury car that cost more than a dozen of my houses. I could hear Jennifer's voice in my head, a shrill, mocking echo. "Mom, you can't drive that thing to my wedding. It's so embarrassing." Oh, Jennifer, honey, you have no idea. This was no longer just about me and my truck. It was about something bigger, something that Arthur had seen and that I was only just beginning to grasp. It was a quiet, profound act of respect, a silent rebuke to a world that had forgotten how to value the simple, genuine things. But what was I supposed to do now? Julian had given me the address, but my mind was spinning. Was this really happening? Could I actually, a woman who carefully budgeted every last dollar, own a Rolls-Royce? Could I walk into that world of opulence and pretense without losing a piece of myself? My life had always been simple and predictable. Now I was facing a choice that could change everything, a choice I was almost afraid to make. I pulled into my driveway, and the sight of my humble home, the garden hose still coiled near the spigot, the mailbox a bit tilted, brought me back to reality. Julian had said Arthur's estate was waiting for me. I had to see it. I had to know if this was real, if it was truly meant for me. The idea of Julian's father, a man of such immense wealth, choosing to honor me, a simple, old woman in a beat-up truck, was staggering. The sheer magnitude of the gesture was truly what humbled me. He didn't give me a check. He didn't give me money. He gave me his most prized possession, the object that represented his own hard-won success, as a sign of respect for my simple dignity. It was a kind of justice, a quiet, profound victory over the superficial world my daughter had embraced. But was I brave enough to claim it? Was I strong enough to step into that reality? I had to find out. I felt a pang of fear that if I didn't see this through, I would be missing something more than a car. I would be missing the most incredible chapter of my life. I knew my daughter wouldn't stop. The texts and calls had been coming in all day, each one more condescending than the last. She had a town car booked, a driver on standby, and a complete unwillingness to listen to a single word of my protest. She had made her decision for me. Well, now I had a choice to make of my own. A choice that would not only prove her wrong, but would teach her a lesson in a way that no words ever could. It was a terrifying and thrilling prospect. I had to trust that Julian's intentions were as pure as his father had intended. I had to believe that this was a gift, not a burden, and that it was given to me for a reason. I was a woman who was about to change. I just didn't know how. And that uncertainty was a fear all its own. What would happen when I showed up? What would I do with a car like that? Would I be able to go through with it? The answer to all those questions was waiting at an address scrawled on a paper napkin, and I couldn't bear the thought of not finding out. The wedding was just weeks away, and the final chapter of this bizarre and wonderful story was about to be written. The key felt heavy in my hand, a symbol of a choice that was about to change everything. I felt the weight of it, the promise of it, and the terrifying unknown that came with it. I had to know what came next. It was a leap of faith, and I was about to jump. I left the diner with the key to a Rolls-Royce in my pocket, a quiet metallic promise that felt more real than the Arizona sun beating down on my head. Driving my old Ford truck, a familiar symphony of rattles and squeaks, I felt like I was in a bizarre dream. The world outside the dusty windshield looked the same. The saguaro standing sentinel against the blue sky, the red dirt roads crisscrossing the desert landscape. But for me, everything had shifted. My humble truck, once a symbol of my quiet dignity, now felt like a relic from a past life. I was driving a time machine, taking me from one reality to a completely different one. My daughter, Jennifer, and her materialistic world suddenly felt small and insignificant, a distant echo of a problem that had just been dwarfed by a completely different class of absurdity. It was a kind of righteous indignation, a quiet, delicious rage that bubbled up inside me. They thought my truck was embarrassing? They thought I was a joke? Well, now I had a secret that could make them choke on their condescension. The address Julian had scribbled on the napkin led me to a private gated road that wound through the wealthiest part of Scottsdale. The homes here weren't just houses. They were sprawling architectural statements with manicured lawns and fountains that looked like they belonged in a museum. The gate was a masterpiece of wrought iron and intricate design. I pulled up to the intercom, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs. "Yes?" a calm, cultured voice asked. "I'm Dorothea. I'm here to see the car," I said, the words feeling foreign and ridiculous on my tongue. "Ah, yes, Mrs. Mance, we've been expecting you. The gate is opening now. Please follow the drive to the main house. The garage is just behind it." Mrs. Vance. The name sounded strange and new, so formal and respectful. It was an acknowledgement of my new status, a status I still couldn't quite believe was mine. As the gate swung open, I couldn't help but let out a little snort of black humor. Mrs. Vance. I was starting to like the sound of that. I followed the perfectly paved driveway, lined with olive trees and desert flora that looked too perfect to be real, until I came to a circular motor court in front of a sprawling Spanish-style villa that seemed to melt into the landscape. It wasn't flashy or ostentatious. It was a testament to old money and understated elegance. The air was silent except for the gentle rush of a fountain and the distant, polite hum of some unseen machinery. I parked my Ford next to a gleaming black SUV that looked like it belonged to a Secret Service agent. The contrast was so stark, so hilariously ironic, that I almost had to sit for a moment and take it all in. My rusty, faithful Ford sitting humbly next to a vehicle that cost more than my entire retirement fund. I got out, my old sneakers crunching on the perfect gravel. A kind-faced man in a crisp uniform, a groundskeeper by the looks of him, approached me with a polite nod. "Mrs. Vance, the vehicle is in the garage. Mr. Julian left instructions for you. The remote is on the driver's seat." He spoke with a quiet reverence as if he were talking about a king, not a car. I just nodded, too stunned to speak. The garage door slid open with a whisper, revealing a space that was more like a showroom than a place for cars. The floors were a polished concrete that reflected the soft recessed lighting, and the air smelled of new leather and old money. And there it was. Not a car, an icon, a phantom. A 1968 Rolls-Royce Phantom 5 to be exact. It was a deep, rich midnight blue, so dark it was almost black, and gleamed under the lights with an impossibly perfect finish. The chrome was a blinding, flawless silver, and the iconic Spirit of Ecstasy hood ornament seemed to float on the front, wings outstretched as if preparing for flight. It was a masterpiece of engineering and art, a silent, powerful testament to a kind of luxury that I had only ever seen in magazines. It was a car that didn't just move, it glided. It wasn't just driven, it was piloted. And it was mine. I walked around it, my hand hovering over the cold, polished metal, too afraid to touch it. I had to restrain myself from just getting on the floor and running my fingers over the perfect lines of the body. My mind went back to Jennifer's condescending texts, to patronizing laughter of Chad's parents, to the casual dismissal of my old truck. They had no idea. They had no idea that while they were busy planning a wedding to impress their friends, I was quietly inheriting a piece of history. I opened the heavy door, the sound of the latch, a quiet, satisfying click, and slid onto the plush leather seat. The world was into itself. The smell of aged leather filled my senses, and the polished wood trim glowed with a warm, elegant light. I ran my hands over the cold surface of the steering wheel, the sheer size and weight of it almost comical in my small hands. I sat there for a long time, just taking it all in. The silence of the garage, the smell of the car, the weight of the key in my pocket. This wasn't just a car. It was a weapon. An elegant, dignified, and utterly devastating weapon against the superficiality and cruelty of my daughter's world. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I had a car, a beautiful, perfect car, but no idea how to drive it, how to handle the sheer gravity of its presence. It was a problem I was more than willing to solve. I had to learn. I had to master this silent beast and show them all that a woman of substance, a woman of character, wasn't to be dismissed or mocked. I was no longer a little old lady in an old truck. I was Dorothea, and I was about to arrive at that wedding in a chariot of justice. But what would happen when I got there? I couldn't help but wonder if they would even recognize me, and if I would recognize myself. The thought was terrifying, but the anticipation was even stronger. I had a story to finish, and the final chapter was about to be written. This story is just getting started, and you don't want to miss what happens next. The wedding is just around the corner, and the big surprise is waiting. The key felt heavy and cold in my hand, a small, elegant monument to a world I had only ever seen on television. The Rolls-Royce gleamed in the subdued light of the garage, a silent, powerful beast waiting for its master. I knew I couldn't just leave. My old Ford, faithful as she was, couldn't give me what I needed now. I needed to know what it was like to be a person of consequence, a person who couldn't be dismissed with a wave of a hand. I needed to understand the weight of a car like this. I ran my hands over the smooth, polished surface of the door, the sheer perfection of it almost overwhelming. It was a tangible rebuke to every cheap shot, every condescending comment, every judgmental laugh that had ever been aimed at my old truck. This was no longer just a car. It was a weapon of justice. A soft, polite cough from behind me made me jump. It was Julian's groundskeeper, the kind-faced man from before, now holding a remote control. Mrs. Vance, Mr. Julian asked me to tell you that he's arranged for a driver to come by tomorrow morning to teach you the vehicle's functions, should you wish to learn. He spoke with a quiet respect that I was still getting used to. It was a far cry from the hurried, impatient way my own family spoke to me. "Oh," I said, my voice a little rusty from disuse. "That's very thoughtful." I felt a familiar pang of humility. A driver, a professional, to teach me to drive a car that cost more than my house. It was absurd. "I can do that myself," I said, a bit of my old independent self bubbling up. "I've been driving for 40 years. The groundskeeper just smiled gently. "This is not like most vehicles, ma'am. The controls are unique. Mr. Arthur was very particular about his cars. We want to ensure you are comfortable and safe." His words were calm and reassuring, and I had to admit he had a point. I knew how to fix a leaky faucet and bake a perfect apple pie, but a Rolls-Royce was a whole different kettle of fish. I nodded, a little humbled. "Thank you. That would be very helpful." The next morning, a man named Philip arrived. He was a tall, silver-haired man with the polished demeanor of a professional driver, but his eyes held a friendly sparkle. He was patient and kind, and he treated me not as a student, but as a colleague. We spent the morning in the quiet solitude of the estate's sprawling driveway, with him teaching me the car's nuances. The steering was light and responsive, the acceleration was smooth and silent, a quiet humming power that felt like a secret. The car's body was so long and wide that at first I felt like I was navigating a land yacht, constantly afraid of clipping a rose bush or a statue. But Philip was an excellent teacher with a calm voice and endless patience. He showed me the car's hidden features, the fold-out tables in the back, the crystal decanter, the intricate controls for the windows and seats. It was a world of luxury and elegance that was so far removed from my own life that it felt like science fiction. In between lessons, my phone would buzz with texts from Jennifer. Each one was more condescending than the last. "Mom, just so you know, the town car is confirmed for 2 p.m. on Saturday. Please don't be late." Another one came in a few minutes later. "I told Chad you're having trouble with your vehicle. He says he can get you a good price on a used sedan if you want." The audacity of it all was breathtaking. My heart, which had been so full of grief and disbelief, was now filling with a cold, quiet fury. They were still treating me like a helpless old woman, a problem to be solved, an embarrassment to be managed. They had no idea that I was busy learning how to drive a car that could buy their entire wedding venue. I looked at the texts, a small, grim smile on my face. Oh, honey, you have no idea. After a few days, I was getting the hang of it. I could glide the car around the estate's private roads with a quiet confidence that was new to me. I learned to trust the car's size, to feel its weight and power, to know its every turn and nuance. It was a learning curve, to be sure, but with every passing day, I felt a new confidence growing inside me. The Rolls-Royce wasn't just a car anymore. It was an extension of me, a physical manifestation of a strength I had known I had. It was a symbol of quiet dignity, of power that didn't need to be loud or showy. It was exactly what Arthur had said it was, a car that matched my soul. I could almost hear him in my head, a quiet, gentle voice saying, "There, you see, I told you so." But I still felt a pang of fear when I thought about the wedding. Could I really do this? Could I drive this magnificent machine, a symbol of such immense wealth and power, into a crowd of people who would judge me for the clothes I wore and the car I drove? Would they even recognize me? What would they do when they saw me pull up in a Rolls-Royce? Would they be shocked? Angry? The thought was terrifying, but it was also thrilling. I had a choice to make. A choice to either continue living in the shadow of my family's expectations or to finally step out into the light. The fear was real, but the anticipation was even stronger. I had a story to finish, and the final chapter was about to be written. The wedding was just days away, and I was no longer the same woman who had pulled up to the community garden in her old Ford truck. I had a secret, a beautiful, powerful secret that was about to be revealed, and I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I was ready to do what I had to do. The morning of Jennifer's wedding dawned with the kind of blinding, perfect Arizona sunshine that seemed designed for a magazine cover. It was a day of orchestrated perfection, with every detail planned to the millimeter, and I was about to throw a wrench into the whole machine. I woke up in my quiet, unassuming house, the scent of fresh coffee mingling with the faint smell of my old Ford from the garage. The air was cool for now, but I knew the desert heat would soon rise to its predictable, oppressive climax, just as the day's tensions were sure to. I felt a quiet, simmering energy that had nothing to do with the coffee. My stomach was a little knot of nerves and anticipation, a mix of maternal love and righteous indignation. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a performance, a grand production, and I had my part to play. I was no longer an invisible extra. I was the silent, powerful antagonist that my daughter had so carelessly created. I had spent the last 2 days preparing. Julian had quietly arranged for the Rolls-Royce to be delivered to my house by a professional driver late one evening, a brilliant, silent operation that managed to slip completely under Jennifer's radar. The sight of it now, sitting in my driveway like a majestic, anachronistic ghost, was breathtaking. Its polished midnight blue body reflected the morning sun like a mirror, and the chrome trim gleamed with a perfect, almost arrogant shine. It was a masterpiece of old-world elegance, a vehicle that belonged in a different era, a different world entirely, a world that was so far removed from my own that I almost couldn't believe it was mine. I ran my hand over the smooth, cool metal, the sheer weight of the car, a tangible promise of power. It was no longer just a Rolls-Royce. It was my armor. It was my quiet defiance. I went inside to get ready, a simple ritual that stood in stark contrast to the chaos I knew was unfolding at Jennifer's suite at the country club. I chose a dress that was a deep emerald green, a simple, elegant silk that I had bought years ago and saved for a special occasion. It wasn't a designer dress, and it wouldn't have impressed anyone in Jennifer's world, but it fit perfectly and made me feel dignified and composed. I did my own hair and makeup, A quick practice routine that I've been doing for decades. No fancy salon visits, no makeup artist, no team of stylists to turn me into someone I wasn't. I was just me, Dorothea. And that was going to be enough. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, and for the first time in a very long time, I saw not a woman who was aging and invisible, but a woman with purpose, with a quiet strength that had been lying dormant for too long. My daughter had tried to make me small. This car, this strange, magnificent gift from a stranger, had reminded me of my own immensity. As I was putting on my simple pearl necklace, my phone buzzed. It was Jennifer, of course. I took a deep breath before answering. Her voice was a tight, stressed wire, stretched to the breaking point. "Mom, you're ready, aren't you? The town car will be there in 20 minutes. Please, for the love of everything, be on time. Chad's parents are already there, and you know how they are about, well, you know." She meant how they were about me, how they judged my simplicity, my lack of pretense, my salt-of-the-earth existence. It was a verbal jab, a passive-aggressive reminder of her shame. "I'm ready, honey," I said, my voice calm, the kind of calm that comes just before a storm. "I'm ready, honey. Don't you worry about me. I'll get there on my own." My heart was thumping, but my voice remained steady. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Mom, what? Don't be ridiculous. I've already paid for the town car. Don't you dare drive that thing to my wedding. I'm begging you. It's a huge day for me. Please, just do this one thing for me." Her voice had dropped to a frantic, pleading whisper. It was the moment of truth, my moment to stand my ground. "Jennifer, I'll be there, and I'll be on time," I said, a quiet, final note of steel in my voice. "You just focus on your big day. I've got everything under control." I hung up before she could respond, a feeling of triumph flooding my senses. The gauntlet had been thrown. The game was on. I walked outside and slid into the back of the Rolls-Royce. The interior was a world of hushed luxury, the deep navy blue leather seats so soft they felt like they were made of clouds. The quiet dignity of the car felt like a second skin. It was an elegant, silent rebuke to every loud, showy luxury my daughter and her world valued. I put the key in the ignition, and the car started with a soft, powerful hum, a gentle purr that promised more power than any of their flashy sports cars. I pulled out of my driveway, the engine a quiet promise of a new future, leaving behind the dust and the memory of my old Ford. My daughter wanted a show? Well, she was about to get one. I was on my way to the country club, not as a guest, but as an elegant, formidable force, a ghost of Christmas future for every superficial person in that crowd. The Rolls-Royce glided silently down the street, and I felt a smile spread across my face. They had laughed at my old car. They had no idea what was about to pull up to their party. The time of talking was over. It was time for a grand entrance. The wedding was about to begin, and a very different kind of performance was about to unfold. I couldn't help but wonder if they were ready. I knew I was. And I couldn't help but wonder if after this day, they would ever look at me or themselves the same way again. The final explosive chapter is just moments away, and you don't want to miss it. I glided the Rolls-Royce down the winding road leading to the country club, the engine a soft, elegant hum that seemed to mock the flashy sports cars zipping past. The car was a world unto itself, a perfectly insulated bubble of quiet dignity and effortless power. I felt like a queen on her way to a coronation, serene and untouchable. The closer I got, the more my heart pounded with a mix of triumph and sheer, unadulterated terror. This wasn't just an arrival, it was a statement, a carefully orchestrated silent act of rebellion. My daughter had wanted a spectacle, and I was about to deliver. The country club, a magnificent palace of glass and polished stone, came into view, and a small crowd had already gathered near the entrance. Guests were milling about, laughing and showing off their designer outfits. I could see the valet station, a hive of activity, with attendants in neat uniforms rushing to open doors for shiny new luxury vehicles. This was their kingdom, their world of money and power, and I was about to invade it. I took a deep breath, adjusted the rearview mirror, and saw a woman I almost didn't recognize. A woman with a quiet confidence in her eyes, a woman who wasn't hiding anymore. I pulled up to the valet stand, and for the first time in what felt like a long time, the world outside my car went completely silent. Every head turned. The chattering stopped. The valets who had been so busy with the Bentleys and Porsches froze. They just stared, their mouths slightly agape. One of them, a young man with a polite, bewildered expression, finally approached the driver's side, a look of utter disbelief on his face. He clearly had no idea what to do with a car of this magnitude, this age, this regal presence. I just smiled calmly and turned off the engine. The silence was deafening. "Keys, ma'am?" he stammered, his eyes wide as he looked at the spirit of ecstasy on the hood. I placed the keys in his outstretched hand, and his fingers trembled slightly as they took them. Just then, the front doors of the country club swung open, and out walked Jennifer and Chad, their faces radiating that kind of self-satisfied pre-wedding glow. They were heading to take photos with some of their friends, but they stopped dead in their tracks, their eyes fixed on the magnificent midnight blue car that was blocking the entrance. Jennifer's perfect smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated confusion. She scanned the car's exterior, her head tilting in a vain attempt to identify the car's owner. It was a beautiful, delicious moment. She was so close to the truth and yet so far away. I got out of the car and I heard a collective gasp from the crowd. I stood up tall, pulling my shoulders back, the emerald green silk of my dress feeling like a suit of armor. I walked around the front of the car, and as I did, I met Jennifer's gaze. Her eyes whitened, her jaw slackened, and her face went from confusion to a slow dawning horror. She had expected to see me in a beat-up old Ford or a nondescript town car. She had not expected to see me in a vehicle that was a work of art, a living legend. "Mom, what is this?" she whispered, her voice a thin, shaky thread. Chad, ever the practical one, just stood there, his eyes fixed on the car, a look of naked greed and pure unadulterated jealousy. He seemed to be mentally calculating its worth, his eyes scanning every inch of its perfect chrome and flawless paint. "It's my right, honey. I told you not to worry about my transportation. I always handle my own affairs." The words were simple, but they were a dagger to her heart. She couldn't speak. She just stood there, her perfect, controlled world crumbling around her, her face a mask of shock and betrayal. Chad finally found his voice. Where did you get this, Dorothea?" he asked, his voice low and full of a predatory curiosity. I just shrugged, a small, nonchalant gesture that felt like the most powerful thing in the world. "I had it," I said, the words hanging in the air, a final, unanswerable taunt. The laughter, the condescension, the humiliation, all of it had just been paid back with a single elegant gesture. I turned and walked into the country club, leaving them to stand there frozen with the Rolls-Royce and 1,000 questions hanging in the air between them. I was no longer an old woman in an old truck. I was Dorothea, and I had just made my point. But what would happen next? The night was young, and the real conversation was just beginning. The final explosive chapter was just moments away, and you don't want to miss it. The wedding was about to begin, and a very different kind of performance was about to unfold. I couldn't help but wonder if they were ready. I knew I was. The silence outside the country club was replaced by a low hum of hushed whispers and curious glances as I stepped through the main doors. It was a cathedral of wealth with towering ceilings, crystal chandeliers that glittered like frozen waterfalls, and a marble floor so polished I could see my own reflection, a small figure in a sea of opulence. I walked with a quiet confidence that felt foreign to me, a posture I had learned from observing the Rolls-Royce, dignified, elegant, and completely self-assured. My simple emerald green dress felt perfect. It was a testament to my own style, not a surrender to theirs. I bypassed the champagne flutes and the small talk and made my way to a quiet corner observing the spectacle. The guests, an immaculate collection of polished faces and designer labels, seemed to be sizing me up. Their smiles polite, but their eyes filled with a desperate curiosity. I could hear their whispers. "Who is that? Did you see what she was driving? Is that a Phantom V?" It was music to my ears, a symphony of their bewilderment. It wasn't long before Jennifer, a vision in white silk and a cloud of tulle, came storming toward me. Her face, which had been so serene and happy just moments before, was now a mask of pure fury. She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Mom, what is going on?" she hissed, pulling me to the side, away from the prying eyes of her guests. "What was that? Where did you get that car? I told you a town car was coming." Her voice was a low, frantic whisper, a furious buzz that was meant for my ears only. I just looked at her, my face a mask of serene composure. "I told you, honey. I handled my own transportation. You told me not to worry." Chad appeared behind her, his face a mixture of anger and a calculating, greedy fascination. He wasn't looking at me, he was looking at the crowd of onlookers, at his parents, at the way the Rolls-Royce was still the center of attention outside. "Dorothea, that's a beautiful car. I've never seen one in such pristine condition. Is it a rental?" He was trying to rationalize it, to find a logical explanation for an impossible situation. I could see the wheels turning in his head, a furious scramble to save face. "No, dear," I said, a small knowing smile on my face. "It's mine." The words hung in the air, a final, unassailable truth. Jennifer gasped, a high-pitched, incredulous sound. Chad's eyes widened, a flicker of naked, shameless greed flashing in them. "How? How could it be yours?" Jennifer demanded, her whisper now a choked-off squeak of betrayal. You don't even own a car that works. You drive that old thing. You're lying. You're trying to ruin my day." The accusation was so absurd, so perfectly Jennifer, that I almost laughed. "Am I?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Is that what you think? I spent a lifetime saving, a lifetime working for what I have, and I was happy with what I had. But you weren't. You were ashamed of me, of my truck. You were ashamed of my simple, good life." My voice was quiet, but it was a quiet that cut like a knife. The crowd was starting to notice the tension, their curious glances turning into outright stares. The show was just beginning. "This is insane," Jennifer muttered, running a hand through her perfectly coiffed hair. "This is not you. What have you done?" Her words were a pathetic mix of genuine bewilderment and self-pity. "I've done what you asked," I said, a small, cold smile on my face. "I've brought a car that won't embarrass you. Isn't that what you wanted?" Chad finally spoke up again, his voice trying to sound reasonable, but the avarice was still there, a hungry animal in his eyes. "Dorothea, we can talk about this later, but for now, you should probably just enjoy the party. And maybe we could discuss the car, the business side of things. It must be worth a fortune." I just shook my head. "There is no business side, Chad," I said, my voice firm. "It's not for sale. It's a gift." I saw Jennifer's face crumple. She had no idea. She didn't know how deep the truth went, how a quiet, humble woman had just outsmarted her and her entire world. This wasn't about money or about cars anymore. It was about respect. It was about dignity. It was about proving them wrong. But what would happen now? The crowd was watching and the tension was about to break. What would Jennifer do next? The truth was about to come out, and you won't believe the secret that was about to be revealed.
I stood there in the opulent ballroom, a small island of quiet dignity in a sea of swirling chaos. My last words, "It's a gift," had landed like a thunderclap, leaving Jennifer and Chad frozen in a state of utter shock. Jennifer's face was a study in betrayal and confusion, her perfect makeup unable to hide the raw fury in her eyes. "A gift? From who?" she demanded, her voice rising to a frantic, hysterical pitch that was beginning to attract more attention. "No one would just give you a car like that. You're lying. You're trying to ruin my day." She was losing control, her carefully constructed facade of a poised, perfect bride crumbling right before my eyes. Chad, ever the opportunist, had already moved past anger and was now in a state of calculating panic, his eyes darting between me and the crowd, trying to find a way to spin this in his favor. "It's not for you to understand, Jennifer," I said, my voice calm and steady, a stark contrast to her frantic energy. "It was a gift from a man who valued kindness over things, a man who saw me for who I am, not what I have." My words were a final, elegant strike. Just as Jennifer opened her mouth to argue, a deep, resonant voice cut through the growing murmur of the crowd. "That's a Rolls-Royce Phantom 5, and a truly magnificent one at that." A tall, distinguished man in a perfectly tailored suit stepped forward. He had a powerful, commanding presence, and the crowd parted for him like a river for a stone. It was Chad's boss, the man Julian had told me about, the one who held the key to Chad's entire career. Chad's face went from pale to ashen. "Mr. Hamilton," he stammered, a look of pure, unadulterated fear on his face. "Sir, I can explain." But Mr. Hamilton didn't even look at him. His eyes were fixed on me, a look of profound respect and recognition on his face. "I'm sorry to interrupt your beautiful day," he said, turning to Jennifer, his voice kind but firm, "but I have to say I'm absolutely stunned. I didn't think I'd ever see that car again." He looked back at me, a genuine smile on his face. "You must be the woman my late friend Arthur met at the community garden. He told me he had found a person who was so rare, so kind, that he had to do something to honor her." The words hung in the air, a final, unassailable truth. A woman who was so rare, so kind. The crowd murmured, their whispers turning from speculation to a stunned, quiet awe. Jennifer's head snapped from Mr. Hamilton to me, her eyes wide with the slow, horrifying realization that the secret I had been guarding was far bigger, far more profound than she had ever imagined. This wasn't a lie. This wasn't an attempt to ruin her day. This was a quiet, magnificent act of justice that was playing out in front of everyone she had ever wanted to impress. Chad stood there, paralyzed, a pathetic, silent monument to his own greed and superficiality. He had been so quick to judge me, to dismiss me, to try and exploit what he thought was a stroke of luck. He had no idea that I was not a problem to be solved, but a quiet, powerful force he had just completely underestimated. Arthur left her his most prized possession. He said she deserved a car that matched her soul, not her bank account. His eyes were on Chad now, a hard, disapproving look that cut right through his carefully constructed facade. He said she was the first person in years who didn't want anything from him. The words were a direct, public indictment of Chad's own behavior, and the behavior of everyone in this room who had ever judged me for my old Ford. It was the moment of truth, a reckoning that was more powerful than any shouting match, any confrontation. It was the truth, delivered by a man with undeniable authority and respect, and it was devastating. Jennifer's eyes welled with tears, not of joy or love, but of pure, unadulterated humiliation. Her perfect wedding, her perfectly planned life was a disaster. Chad, a man who had only ever cared about appearances and money, was exposed as a shallow, greedy opportunist in front of his boss and his future in-laws. His parents, who had looked down on me with such smug condescension, now looked at me with a bewildered awe and at their son with a quiet, icy fury. The laughter, the condescension, the humiliation, all of it had just been paid back with a single elegant gesture and a single powerful truth. I just stood there, my hands clasped, a quiet, serene smile on my face. I didn't need to say a word. The truth had set me free, and it had exposed them all for who they really were. The wedding was about to begin, but the real show was already over. But what would happen now? The truth was out, but the final chapter of this story was still unwritten. What would be the ultimate consequence of this day, of this moment? I had no idea, but I knew I was ready for whatever came next. The final explosive chapter was just moments away, and you don't want to miss what happens now that the truth is out.
The silence that followed Mr. Hamilton's words was more deafening than any scream. Jennifer stood there, a white ghost in the middle of a collapsing dream. Her perfect wedding, her perfectly curated life, was now a public spectacle of her own making. The guests, her friends, her carefully chosen acquaintances, all of them were looking at her, not with admiration, but with a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. The entire room felt like it was holding its breath. I looked at Chad, who was standing beside her, and his face was a portrait of pure, unadulterated terror. He wasn't afraid of losing Jennifer. He was afraid of losing his future, of losing the favor of the man who held his entire career in his hands. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. He was completely undone. The truth, delivered by a man with undeniable authority, had done what I never could. It had exposed them for who they really were. Jennifer's selfishness, Chad's greed, their entire world built on superficiality and a disdain for anything they couldn't control. Mr. Hamilton just looked at them with a quiet, icy disappointment. He didn't need to say another word. The silence spoke volumes. I felt a strange mixture of pity and finality. My heart ached for my daughter, but I also felt a profound sense of peace. This wasn't my fight anymore. The battle had been won. I just turned and walked away. There was nothing left to say. My purpose for being there had been fulfilled. The truth was out. The humiliation had been delivered. I had made my point, and I had done it with quiet dignity and a Rolls-Royce. I walked through the crowd, past the stunned faces and the whispered conversations, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt truly seen. They weren't looking at my clothes or my age or my old truck. They were looking at me, Dorothea, a person who had a story, a person who had a quiet strength they never knew existed. I walked out of the country club and into the blazing Arizona sun, leaving the wreckage of Jennifer's perfect day behind me. I got back into the Rolls-Royce, and the silence of the car's interior was a welcome, comforting blanket. I closed the door, and it shut with a solid, gentle thud that was a world away from the slamming doors and loud noises of my old truck. I sat there for a moment, just breathing, feeling the adrenaline and the tension drain out of me. The car felt different now. It was no longer a weapon, no longer a symbol of my vengeance. It was a gift from a kind, generous man, a testament to a connection that had been made over a wheelbarrow of compost and a shared love for the simple things. The Rolls-Royce wasn't what defined me. It was what had revealed me. I drove home slowly, not just through the streets, but through my memories. I thought about George, my late husband, and a small, peaceful smile touched my lips. He would have loved this. He would have loved the quiet absurdity of it all. He would have been so proud. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this wasn't about him or a car. It was about me and the woman I had become. The woman who had been a quiet, invisible force for so long, a woman who had finally found her voice, a voice that didn't need to be loud or showy to be heard. When I pulled into my driveway, my old Ford was sitting right where I left her. I just looked at her for a long time, my old, faithful friend. She had done her job. She had been a symbol of my simple, good life, and now she was a memory. I knew I couldn't drive her anymore. It wouldn't feel right. I would find a good home for her, a family who would love her and care for her, a family who would appreciate the years of faithful service she had given me. I got out of the Rolls-Royce, and as I walked to my front door, I felt a sense of peace that was deeper and more profound than any car, any wedding, any revenge. My life had changed, yes. I had a magnificent car, a symbol of immense wealth. But what I had truly won was my dignity. I had won back my place in the world, not as an old woman who could be dismissed, but as a person of substance and character. The next day, my phone buzzed with a text from Julian. My father would be so proud, it read. It was a simple message, but it meant more than $1 million. He had seen the truth and he had reached out. And in that moment, I knew that my life was just beginning. It was a new chapter, a new road, a new journey, and I couldn't wait to see where it would take me.